This is the moment for those of you who are interested in the AI and sustainability, AI and climate change conversation to come and take a seat. And for those in the back of the room, please come join us, or it's the time to move to your next part of your program. Good afternoon. I'm Dan Esty, professor at Yale in the Environment School and the Law School. I also teach in the Management School and the Global Affairs School, so cover a fair bit of ground. And the topic today that we're picking up covers a fair bit of ground. We are interested in the question of AI, artificial intelligence and sustainability, but more specifically in the spirit of Climate Week New York, its impacts on and potential for uplifting the global commitment to climate change action. We've framed this conversation as frontier issues in the AI climate change interface, seizing the opportunity, meeting the challenge. So we are interested both in the potential for artificial intelligence to serve the global community's efforts to respond to climate change, but also interested in the challenges that this new technology might pose. We've brought together an extraordinary panel to help us think through this conversation. And I'm going to introduce them only briefly, and given limited time, we want to get right into the conversation. We're going to have an initial back and forth on the stage, but then turn to your questions and short, sharp questions and answers I hope will be equally crisp from the front of the room. So again, thank you all for attending. This is a topic I think of enormous importance. For those of you who've been across the city of New York this week, taking on board some of the conversation, I set the stage for our discussion today by noting a couple of themes that I have seen really emerge in great force. Number one, in my perspective, is the sense that despite headwinds that are plainly visible, blowing hard, there is still an enormous amount of interest in how the world community might come together and respond to climate change. And there is a great deal of innovation, creativity, and imagination being brought to that question. But that focus on new and different and better ways of approaching climate change is in part a function, I think, of a growing sense that the climate regime as it's currently structured is not succeeding. Some might use harsher language than that to describe the circumstances we face. But I think there is an important question about whether that new and different and better approach to climate change, including climate change governance, how we coordinate across 190 nations and 7 billion people, there is an important question about whether new technologies might help us with that challenge. And that is really what we're here today to dig into in some depth and I hope detail. We've got 4 great speakers, each of whom I'm going to introduce only briefly. You are welcome to look them up online. Each has done extraordinary things over a number of years and in a variety of settings and roles. And if I spent time going through all of that, we wouldn't get to the questions till halfway through our time. So with that, I'm going to jump right in and start with David Sandlow, who sits on the far side of the stage from me. He is the inaugural fellow at the Center for Global Energy Policy at Columbia University within the SEPA school. But he is, perhaps more importantly in the current moment, a podcast host of a new and important podcast on AI, energy, and climate change. And David, you are someone who's been thinking about this issue, writing about this issue now for some significant amount of time, which in this field means 2 years. And it gives me a great pleasure to have you take the stage first, or to take the microphone first, and help us get into the topic. And you really have been thinking as deeply about the challenges and opportunities that AI presents as anyone I know. You've written some important reports and articles on this, and I'd like you to help us get into the topic by starting with what you feel most optimistic about in terms of the promise of AI, but also what are you most worried about in terms of potential downsides? David.
Dan, thank you for that kind of introduction. Thank you for inviting me. Thanks for the partnership in working on these issues over the course of the past couple of months. And thank you for your leadership over so many years, decades really, in this area. It's really benefited all of us, and I'm delighted to be here. You asked about the opportunities and the challenges with AI. There are so many opportunities to use AI to help accelerate the clean energy transition and fight climate change. It's an enormous open field, and I think one way to think about it is just think of how much we have seen AI change the world in the past couple of years, the transformational nature of these large language models that only broke onto the scene a couple of years ago, and then think about trying to apply that type of revolutionary technological change to the fight that we are all in to reduce greenhouse gas emissions and transition away from dirty energy to clean energy. There's enormous opportunities. I'm going to give one example that I'm incredibly excited about, and then I want to give a little bit of a typology of one way to think about it. So here's one example out of many that I'm really excited about. It's using AI for clean energy materials innovation. There are lots of ways that we need to innovate new and different materials in order to accelerate the clean energy revolution. Just battery chemistry is an obvious way. We did a meeting a little while ago with a group of geothermal experts who were saying there's tremendous potential in geothermal, but you need new types of materials to survive and thrive down in the subsurface where it's very hot, where it's very saline, where it's very corrosive. We need clean energy materials across a wide variety of domains. Famously, 150 years ago, when Albert Einstein was looking for materials to come up with for the modern light bulb, he spent literally a year running electricity through dozens of different types of filaments to see how much light and heat would be produced, literally a year. Today we can simulate 1 million of those interactions in a second. And beyond the speed at which we can do that, we can actually try materials that don't actually exist and see whether they have the properties that we're looking for in new materials. And then if it looks like they do based upon AI predictive models, then we synthesize them and see if they do. So I think there is tremendous potential in using AI to accelerate the pace of invention and innovation, which is going to make a big difference in the clean energy revolution. I don't want to be too Pollyannish about it. Invention is only one stage. Once you invent a new material, you've got to synthesize it, you've got to deploy it, and you've got to bring it to scale in the world. But accelerating the pace of invention is really important. So this is one example. I actually heard in my last meeting from my friend Michal Nachmany, who runs Climate Policy Radar, a great typology of the ways that AI can help. So I'm just going to read that to you quickly. She said AI can optimize what we're already doing. And examples of that, for example, are wind and solar farms. Right now, you can, well, actually, a better example are buildings. You can optimize the use of energy in buildings using sensors with AI if you've got the data. And actually, Dean Abramson, who's here, can tell us a lot about that topic. She's an expert in that topic. So you can optimize what you're already doing. You can predict things. And that's where solar and wind farms come in. So with AI tools, we can much more cheaply predict solar and wind clouds, solar patterns. And that is already making a big difference in the efficiency of solar farms, because you can track solar panels more efficiently with these AI tools. The third category Michal pointed to is doing new things. And my example of materials innovation is an example of doing new things. And her fourth example is informing decision making. And I think we can use AI to come up with better decisions if we've got the right data and the right structures. So I've probably already gone on too long, but you asked me to talk about a challenge.
Yes, I'm going to give you a minute more
to
get to the downsides, the risks, the challenges.
I'll tell you, and this we can come back to this because this may be a controversial position. I think the biggest worry that I have is that we don't seize the opportunity to do all these good things. That we don't organize society, getting the right people together, getting the right incentives to use this technology well. I'm not unworried, but I am less worried about the topic that's most in the public domain, which is all the electricity that's going to data centers and whether that's going to cause lots of pollution. We can come back to that, but just by way of one way of thinking about this, today in the United States, data centers use about 5% of electricity. Globally, they use about 1.5% of electricity. That means in the United States, 95% of our electricity is not going to data centers, and 98.5% of our electricity globally is not going to data centers. So if we can use these AI tools to improve the efficiency and reduce the greenhouse gas emissions from the entire rest of the economy, we have the potential, I think, to overwhelm the benefits, overwhelm with benefits all the costs that come from that side. We can come back to that.
Wonderful, David. Thank you very much. And I should have mentioned that you have also spent time in government, and one of the great joys is to see your thinking, which is both from a perspective now at Columbia and got some depth and conceptual framework, but also the practical realities of what it takes to optimize policy, to drive progress, and to think about how it plays out in the real world. So thank you. Uday Kempka, Managing Director of the Kempka Foundation. You and I have been thinking about how to advance sustainability together for 2 decades. And I have never seen you more excited than in the last 2 years as you have really started to dig into this AI opportunity, but also serious about the challenges. And so I want to give you a moment just to talk about your work in your other title as Director of the Green AI Learning Network, or GRAIL. So if you could give us a perspective on what you're doing with GRAIL and why you are so excited.
Well, Dan, thank you very, very much. I'm absolutely thrilled to be here, honored to be here with some of my heroes on the panel with you. And I'm also grateful because we've been on this journey for a few months now after a summit we had in London, and you picked up this and brought this together in this wonderful way. Thank you for your hospitality and organizing this, and also to Megan, wherever she is. GRAIL. So by way of introduction, we are a family foundation from India that has been focused on climate for 33 years, since the Earth Summit in Rio, a bit lonelily, if that's an adverb. And in COP26 in Glasgow, we came to the realization that, talking to all our friends, that we were not going to make the numbers for the end of the decade. The 43% decarbonization from 2019 levels to 2030. I apologize to those of you who may have a different view and see me as being discouraged. It's not discouragement, it's just saying, what the hell else can we take and attack this with speed and scale? We also came to the view that the one thing that was going to increase as vertically as climate change, maybe more vertically, was the suite of technologies around AI, robotics, quantum, and so forth. And so the background to this, is this up there yet? No, how do I start this maybe? Oh no. Could you put that on the screen? Yeah. So the background to the Green Artificial Intelligence Learning Network, cutesy name of GRAIL, is that we decided to go around the planet and interview institutions that were AI institutes and companies on the one side, and deep decarbonization industry domains, groups of utilities, groups of EV companies, groups of very large multinationals, and ask only one question. How much are you guys engaging with each other? How much are the AI guys engaging in the climate challenge, the greatest suite of technologies on the planet, engaging in the greatest challenge? And how much do you, utilities and all these companies, have you started to think about how you can use AI for your decarbonization journeys? 3 years ago, that answer was frighteningly limited and restricted. And so we decided to create a not-for-profit called GRAIL. And GRAIL seeks to bring together these communities. And it is trying to apply the J-curve. I'm not going to spend too much time, we don't have time on the slides, but basically against the climate J-curve. Climate AI, who I think are here, an NGO, had already created a bit of a taxonomy. And of course, we've had this amazing set of papers from Professor David Sandlow and from others. And so we started to think through taxonomies of where these applications could be, and started to really dig down on this over 2 years, and came up with the institutional design of a collaborative space, bringing together academic institutions, all sorts of commercial institutions, venture capital firms, and so forth. But most importantly, the decarbonization customers, the utilities, the freight networks, etc., the industrial networks that could use all this and work with big groups of those like WBCSD, who are probably Dominic's in the room, and a lot of philanthropies. Think about how could we create a collaborative co-innovation and funding network, and also work in a few countries that we were connected to. The idea then was to take that and create both ideas and deal flow that could then be brought back into that collaborative space, so people could work together to sprint towards that obvious opportunity set that all of you intuitively know must be true, and then take that to funding as well, to the extent that was helpful, whether that was philanthropic funding or whether that was corporate funding. All this came together in a summit that David anchored and Michelle closed us off on, and we're so grateful to you, which brought together, it was a partnership between the Kemker Foundation and Britain's AI institution, the Alan Turing Institute, and then soon we had all of UK academia. So it was at UCL's campus, King's, Imperial, Oxford, Cambridge, lots and lots of other universities, and also the privilege of having Columbia and Yale, and the Vector Institute and the University of Toronto, Abu Dhabi, the Indian Institute of Science. lots of companies, DeepMind, NVIDIA, Google, but also startups coming together with the domain industry networks, the utilities, the big multinationals, the freight networks, and so forth, to say, what could these win-wins look like? What could these applications look like? So these 115 organizations gathered over 2 days to look at AI for power generation. What are the opportunities? AI for the grid and balancing it with new renewables. What are the opportunities? And so forth. I don't have time to go through everything, on road transport, on shipping, aviation, et cetera, et cetera. It was a great success, I think we all agree, because of the passion of the people who were involved and the sense that we could do something, move the needle at scale. There was also the discovery of some numbers that the Grantham Institute had put out that, the downside that David referred to was somewhere between 0.5 gigaton and 1.5 gigatons on extra energy demands in terms of GHG emissions by 2035, but the opportunity was 3.5 to 6 gigatons on the opportunity side, and most of that energy demand was really being used for retail or media. I know I have to speed up. What's happened since then is we decided that we would bring together a whole bunch of experts to look at this in a much more deep way, to come up with interinstitutional grand challenges where we could then bring all the experts from the power sector, for example, in AI, together and come up with interinstitutional global grand challenges, so that if innovation or funding could go into supporting these companies or these research projects, they could crack serious decarbonization problems. That is just landed today. You're the first people to see the results of this, and these are the grand challenges that we will be now putting out to all of you, asking you the favor of being our partners to critique them, to add value in an open, collaborative way. There are teams from all those kinds of constituencies from 8 countries involved. We also, apart from those 3, will be working on value chains and supply chains for working with our partners on WBCSD, on the food and building materials value chains. Aside from doing that, all of that to lead to final published results that go out to the innovation and funding communities, we've also created a digital collaboration platform that we promised. And if this goes well, that's meant to be something that I can press a button and it works. I don't know how that works. Could someone put that on? It's a 60-second video of the collaborative space. You guys have a way of doing that back there? Thank you. This is the collaborative platform for all of you to work on to actually create these innovations. And today is the launch. So those of you who were with us in April, we promised this, and we're delivering it today. Anyway, they get a sense. You can stop that. Thank you very much. So we welcome you as partners, and we wish that you would collaborate with us.
Uday, congratulations. It's fantastic to see and lots to do, but this is the first step, so congratulations. Michael Galopter, you are the Executive Director of the Yale Center for Environmental Justice, but that is too narrow an introduction. You've been working in the climate change and clean energy space for a couple of decades, including stops at Google and a number of other places along the way. Great joy to now have you at Yale with us. But I do want to go to your core focus and ask a question that I think is on the minds of a number of people, and certainly in the conversations I've been in recent weeks and months, a significant potential downside that I think we have to put on the table here. And it really is a question about fairness. And you are among those thinking a lot about environmental justice, climate change justice, and I guess I want to press you on whether you see AI ultimately as a positive force for a fairer world, for a way to deal with inequality that we all know is a challenge, or is there a risk that it becomes an exacerbation of existing inequality and takes us in the wrong direction?
Thank you, and it's a pleasure to be here. And I'm going to show some work towards the end of my talk here that was created by two of our colleagues, Vlad Gelu, and a recent School of Management grad, who's our AI director, and Axel Herrera, who's helping us with deployment and testing with communities. And you can approach them afterwards as well. So fundamentally, I do look, anytime you talk about AI, and I'm sure people in the audience feel the same way, people are like, well, what about its environmental impacts? How destructive are they? I personally, not just personally, there's a lot of, basically 8% of electricity, growth in electricity for the next 5 years will come from the tech sector. In a world where we're electrifying vehicles and industry and everything else, it's not by any means the end of the world. As John Koomey says, a classmate of mine from Berkeley, the inventor of Koomey's Law, which showed that you basically double the energy efficiency of tech every 2 years, says there's no reason why the richest companies in the world can't build renewable energy and pay normal prices for energy and have it deploy well. The real challenge from a fairness and justice perspective is it is being used as a stalking horse by the fossil fuel industry to build more capacity, by utilities that don't want to innovate, by grid innovators that don't want to put new renewables or demand response on the grid. And so it's really a stalking horse in some sense for us, for a set of lower, and by the way, if those of you are academic, Coase theorem tells you that basically polluters will build bigger pipes to get more leniency. It's well known in economic theory, and that's what's happening here. Sam Altman doesn't know that much about energy, nor does Eric Schmidt. They know a lot about a lot of other things. And the industry, the fossil fuel industry, is using it as a stalking horse, and utilities that don't want to modernize. So that's the distraction we have to pay attention to. And yes, we should be deploying this stuff with clean energy, and there's no question if we can do that. Now, that being said, I think I don't have a definitive answer. I do think that another way, that the positive answer, is that AI is a tremendously empowering technology. And so I want to show you, we've been building tools, and I will issue this as a challenge. People at Google and other places say that we are the only people building AI to help build engagement and political will. That is not Yale's job, so this is a research project that's built as a set of tools that can be redeployed by communities, and that we do the back-end research for effectiveness. I'm not going to actually run demos. These are live screens. We built a tool called PEPPER, Public Participation in Environmental Regulation, which in the United States allows communities and members to make public comments, which is a part of the regulatory and judicial process on new rules being issued. This one is, for example, a heat and injury illness prevention rule. You see a relatively lay person's term. There's a refractory period required to recover from extra hot days, and this rule doesn't provide enough recovery time for me at my workplace. My colleague who does work on health and climate can confirm that's an issue, perhaps. And then it generates a letter for submission to the record about that rulemaking. We built one specifically. There are many applications that don't have to do with environmental justice once you start thinking this way. One of my colleagues suggested that we build Dr. Pepper, which we did for the endangerment finding. What we did specifically was allow people to load their research as a PDF here, and it would go, and it takes your research and contrasts it with the 90-some-odd heavily denialist pieces of paper that were in the EPA effort to roll back this endangerment finding, and we'll see where EPA comes down on it. There will be legal fights around it. And it rebuts that with the literature you provided and provides a detailed public comment letter, taking your research and turning it into rebuttals and points about why we should perhaps keep a climate change rule of climate endangerment finding. So the question I get at, and we have a social media version of this that could operate in extremely strong viral ways that I'm not going to talk about right now. We're not rushing this out the door because there's chances that this could that large-scale democratic engagement could endanger the channels through which we engage large-scale democratically. We had already been starting a tool called Climate Action and Information for Communities, CAKE. This is an implementation. And this is meant to be agnostic to the political environment in which you operate. And it's meant to bring frontline communities who are affected by climate change into that mitigation and adaptation debate. This is a live site. This was built, imagine that you're in Mumbai, in the eastern part of Mumbai that suffered extreme floods between August 15th and August 20th this year. You can go log on, and we'll create an instance. This created an instance of an AI. Everything you're seeing here was built by an AI based on a request from not actual community, we did it ourselves, but a community can make this request. And what they got here is a 4-panel, basically, information scene, right? What happened? Floods in August 25. What caused it? Who are the key decision makers? And what are the commitments that have been made so far about these risks? When you click on this, you can then ask more detailed questions about what caused it. You can do that across the other 4 domains, and you can do it, and this is built by crawling news sources, media, YouTube, et cetera, in the area, in the affected regions, and you'll eventually be able to call this up from any community in the world that's a frontline community. Huge implications also for adaptation and mobilization around adaptation. So building tools to build engagement and political will, because technology is awesome, but we do know that at the end, we have enough solutions. The challenges are really a lack of political processes and policies to implement them. And you can click a button and change the language in which it presents it. So this tool, we're rolling this out slowly, testing it with people in communities, doing a lot of error checking. This is all referenceable and stuff like that for the communities that are doing it. They can add their own resources. This is, I think, the potential of AI that brings me hope for its use and mobilizing as many people as possible to make the changes we need to make.
Michael, thank you very much. It is really exciting to see. Alex Abramson, you are the Dean of the Columbia Climate School. You've done a lot of research and work on innovation, but you also have been in government at the Department of Energy, so you've got, again, a broad base of experience. And I want to push you a little bit on your research and the critical role of innovation more broadly in moving the world to a sustainable energy future. And I know you've thought about this in a number of regards, but I want to ask specifically how we might think about AI as a potential spur to innovation, and how would we ensure that that innovation is going to help us deliver on the greatest upside potential, but also, as I was pressing David, how do we make sure that we limit the downside risks that might also come along?
Yeah, a great question, and we heard a little bit of this from David in his materials example. Of course, innovation has catalyzed so much of our economic prosperity in this country and other parts of the world, and innovation is driving economies in other parts of the world where everybody deserves to lead a better quality of life. And so we want to encourage innovation. We want to encourage energy usage as well. At the same time, we need to think about what we're innovating, how we're innovating, and what we're introducing into the real world when. One thing in terms of using AI, I've been in academia for a while. The normal sort of operations in terms of a scientist, I'm an engineer, has been you come up with a really innovative idea and you write a grant proposal and maybe that gets funded, and then you do research, and it takes a long, long time before you might translate that innovation into the real world. And with AI, right, looking at new materials and other innovations I'll talk about in a second, we're able to sort of speed up that process. And as an engineer, I truly appreciate that. I do not necessarily want to go down a path that might take me to a solution that really isn't a solution for economic or political policy reasons, for equity reasons. Maybe it's not the best solution. I want to have an informed research path. Now, fundamental research is also quite important, and I'm not dismissing that, but for those of us who want to have a shorter term impact and want to see innovation happen, using AI to inform in that way is really critical. So AI is being used now across a variety of different technologies and innovations. So everything from carbon capture to grid optimization, buildings optimization. We've got in many parts of the world distributed energy resources. How are we going to best integrate those onto the grid? Transportation, how do we get around better when you have Climate Week and the UN events going on at the same time? Manufacturing in particular. This is a really great example because many of the companies that I talk to, they're always trying to innovate their manufacturing. And using AI to help optimize across a whole slew of variables that they've never been able to consider before are key. That's going to lead to energy efficiency, has been alluded to. And as a result, even though we're using more computational power and therefore energy to arrive at those solutions, we are reducing the energy required for those manufacturing processes. We're seeing it across much of the work that's going on to identify methane leaks globally, so satellites that have been launched. The kind of data analytics that you need to do to identify methane to have the kind of impact we want to have requires AI machine learning. Also, identifying new refrigerants. I work in the heating and cooling space, and refrigerants, heat pumps, and heat pumps are a big part of the equation. Refrigerants that leak can have a many more times impact on greenhouse gas emissions than just the amount of carbon that's released into the environment due to the operation. So identifying new refrigerants that have low global warming potential. And then also, and it's been mentioned, extreme weather events. The ability to predict extreme weather events with better accuracy earlier. We have quite an effort at the Columbia Climate School focused on climate adaptation. And so disaster preparedness, mitigating the impact of those extreme weather events is critical, and doing more sophisticated modeling is going to help us do that. So lots and lots on the horizon, and again, as David pointed out, a lot of those innovations will lead to accelerated time frames as well as reduced energy consumption. But I also want to mention that we've had many innovations in the last couple of decades that are kind of trudging along right now. I have mentioned before that the innovations are that I'm in the building space. I do a lot of work in the building energy efficiency space, and I was around at Department of Energy when we were getting some of the first heat pump water heaters out the door in partnership with national labs and companies. And you see them, you can walk into a big box store and buy these, but really it's taken a long time, and it's taking a long time to get this amazing technology out into the real world. There's many different reasons for that, but I think that AI, and this is sort of a tangential benefit, AI and the data center usage that we need as a result of that computational power that we're going to need is really pushing on the value of electricity. That electricity is now being valued in a way that it never was before. And it's a little bit, I'm talking about price, but not fully, right? That electricity is becoming more important. And so some of those older innovations, right, the heat pumps, right, the heat pump water heaters, even windows and insulation, they're now going to be more valuable because the more that you can do to save energy, to save electricity, the easier it's going to be to convince folks to implement them in new construction or in retrofits that have to happen. And so that value then leads to more innovation getting out into the real world.
Thank you very much for that perspective. I really like that because it's not just a question of optimization, which we hear a lot, but it's actually, and I was just imagining this as you were speaking, it's optimization of optimization. So you've got multiple things you're trying to optimize, and this will help you figure out how to make sure each of those pieces gets to where it needs to be, and you don't end up chasing a building materials innovation that you've forgotten to take into account fire prevention or some third-tier issue that eventually sinks the technology.
Exactly. And I wanted to make sure I also add to your question around how do we make sure essentially that we're thinking about the unintended consequences and of these innovations, and I think that's really key. That also has to do with getting partners involved early on before those innovations are actually being put out into the real world, so that we can ask a slew of questions around what might the negative sustainability consequences be? Are we really considering how we would deploy this technology equitably across the globe? So just wanted to make sure that that absolutely has to be part of the implementation plan as well.
And I do think some of the greatest failures of sustainability, broadly climate change in particular, are narrow perspectives on what's required. So I'm very excited about what I'm going to start calling second derivative AI, and really using it as a tool for achieving optimization of optimization. So thank you for that. And I do think we have now some questions that we need to push a little further into. So I want to ask a question that any of you can answer, but you've all said that there's these potentials, and I'm wondering whether the market is going to get us to those potentials, or whether we need a policy framework that's refined in order to produce the change that is most positive, least threatening, and quickest in addressing the most challenging issues. So would any of you want to jump in on policy frameworks? David?
Of course we need policy.
Thank you.
The problems we're talking about are some often problems of the commons that need government-related tools to address. Global warming is the obvious one, but there's lots of others. I think we've seen policy frameworks be successful in advancing fight against pollution over the years. Emissions trading, which I know you were involved with, Dan, decades ago, has been very, very successful. 100% we need policy frameworks. But we're in an era where policy frameworks are inconsistent, to use a weak word, here in this country. And so I think we also need to think about what we can do without consistent policy frameworks. And there's some good news here in this area, actually, which is that by good fortune, some of the most dominant companies in this space that are some of the richest companies in the world have a long track record of actually working diligently and effectively to address some of these issues. Google has got tremendous work that they're doing in this area. Microsoft has got tremendous work they're doing in this area. NVIDIA as well. And so I think in an area in which there's a policy retreat, we may be looking more to some of the hyperscalers who are committed to actually advancing solutions in this area. But in the long term, 100% we need policy.
So, Uday, I want to have you jump in on this, if you would, because you've been thinking about how this plays out not only in the global north, but the global south. And one of the challenges may be weaker governance structures and the need to ensure that the policy framework there gets reinforced. And what I'm hearing David say is that we should be able to find best practices more quickly, but sometimes they'll be different in Mumbai versus Montreal or Manhattan.
Sure, I'd say that there are going to be some questions which are universal and some that could be local. But let's start off with a case study of a universal question. So as you know, we're moving towards a distributed energy economy to a very great extent, an energy matrix where houses and EVs and generation storage, it's all going to get linked up. And obviously data and AI will be important, we know that. But one of the big issues for a utility in bringing in more renewable energy, as you know, is how do I balance myself? There's an enormous amount of storage capacity that's going to emerge, for example, in Australia today, in homes or in cars. So in theory, a utility could lean on distributed storage resources in these retail environments. However, the policy framework protects data for people in those environments. So how do we negotiate the space between the need the utility has to get that information and access with the need for sovereignty and privacy at the level of the customer? So it's not just policy, it's the institutions for data sharing, and these sorts of things are going to be universal because data and solving the problem of data, what we call the second order challenges, is a universal need for AI to sit on top of. On the other hand, there are going to be things that can be quite local. One of the companies we're very excited about, or projects we're very excited about, is taking licensing of new solar projects and speeding that up from, I don't know how much, what is it in this country, like a year or some enormous amount of time. And they've proven that they can, for smaller solar projects, drop that by like 10x using the sorts of things Michelle was dealing with and other planning tools. Now, that will vary from regulatory regime to regulatory regime. I do think, however, that the companies or projects that are working for these challenges have very large global markets. They may need to tweak. Another example is, well, I won't go into that, but that hopefully gives a small sense of this.
Well, I think that you're making a good point that you can optimize with a base of best practice, but then tailor to specific circumstances. So there's a potential for mass customization at speed and scale that may in fact be quite a step forward. I'm going to give our panel one more minute to comment, but I'm also about to come to you all for questions or comments. There are microphones that are going to be run around, so if you want to ask a question, make a short, sharp comment, raise your hand and we'll get you a microphone. Alexis.
I think one thing I would add, and this is not true for every policy, but there are many policies out there where having strong industry partnership, right, helps, not in all cases, but helps that policy helps what that policy ultimately becomes, and then helps sustain that policy. And yeah, you know, one example I like to use has to do with energy efficiency standards, appliance standards. That there's been this long-standing partnership between the Department of Energy and EPA and Congress and appliance manufacturers. We've seen it with cafe and car standards. Again, there's some controversies there, but overall, long-standing policies that the companies want. They want because they want a level playing field, because they want to be pushed to innovate. And so when you can have that kind of partnership, that synergy, it helps make policies just that much more robust.
Wonderful. Any last thoughts before we go to the audience? All right, it's on to you. Questions, comments? Let's go to the front row first. Megan right here. And then we'll go 3 rows back after that.
Hi, thank you.
Please tell us who you are and then a short question.
Hi, I'm Trigya Singh from the Global Renewables Alliance. We are an advocacy organization for renewables, as the name says. We represent all 6 technologies of renewable energy. And my question is, what are your views, and anyone can answer, on energy for AI? How can AI help us fight the fossil fuel fight?
Okay. David, quick answer.
One of the interesting ways is by providing payments in a steady stream for renewables, including for innovative renewables. So today, the large companies I was mentioning that operate the large data centers of the world are actually the biggest purchasers of renewable energy in the world, and they've helped to de-risk clean energy technologies over the years. And these are called advanced market commitments, the de-risking strategies. And when you have a company that's got enormous cash flow, like some of these hyperscalers, willing to invest in an innovative clean energy technology, it can really help to bring the technology forward faster. That's happening with geothermal right now. It's happening with small modular reactors and some other areas as well.
Wonderful. Uday.
Yeah, well, firstly, I want to acknowledge Trigya. Her global alliance has been an extraordinary friend to our Grail project in giving us input. Thank you for that. Secondly, I just want to say we've passed, at least in India, a very important tipping point where the cost of solar plus storage, because these data centers need firm energy, is now lower than the cost of new coal. And that happened recently. So for the first time, we're moving into a new world where you could actually think of firm energy from traditional renewables. And I want to thank Nalin as well, who's sitting there, for his enormous steermanship of our power group. Thank you.
Right here.
Yes, hi, my name is Terry Gibbs with the Alliance for Sustainability. If I could just ask 2 things. The first thing is...
Very quickly.
Okay. I was at
One a little slower.
Okay. Our Yale School of Management, we had our 50th reunion, and we had a panel on AI. And it was really shocking to sort of hear some of the things that we heard, how wonderful it all is, but no discussion at all. And there was a big conference at Yale for 2 years, no discussion about some of the challenges. So the 2 things that I wanted to bring up that I brought up there, and I wanted to ask you because I love all the work that you guys are doing. The first thing is about the water and energy use for AI, for the data centers. And in Minnesota, we have a massive, massive problem. These companies are not honest. They're not actually talking to the public about what their use is going to be at all. So I think, Michael, as you were referring to, it's really a major social justice issue in many ways. So I wanted to just ask your thoughts on that. And then the second is a really heartfelt question, because so many of us that have been using AI and talk about all of the wondrous uses, as all of you did, I would just really like to hear what you guys think about the real threat that AI poses to life on this planet in terms of war. So I would it's a different topic, but I think if sustainability is about war, and if you have war where it's out of control, I really would like to hear what your thoughts are.
All right, 2 good questions. About it. We'll start first on energy and water effects. Anyone want to, Alexis, you want to go to that?
I'll speak about the water piece as it has to do with future data centers. I know David can talk a lot about this as well. So as computational power is increasing, right, in terms of density, we're doing many more computations per square millimeter, essentially. the heat that's generated is immense. And we've gotten to a point, interestingly, where you have to use liquid cooling now to cool the computational infrastructure. The even sophisticated air-based cooling, it's just not going to be able to remove the heat nearly as much. What's amazing about liquid-based cooling, it is more expensive, and that's really why it hasn't been used to date, but now we have no choice. And what's amazing about liquid-based cooling is that it uses much less energy. You're able to immerse computational hardware in liquids, essentially, and then that liquid is in a closed loop. So it's no longer air blowing over equipment that air then needs to cool, and so you use cooling towers and then evaporation of some sort, and then a water use problem, certainly. So where we're moving to, it's just really the revolution, and this has just started, but we are moving to a future of data centers where water use will be, and energy use for cooling specifically, will be much more minimized.
Dave, you want to add to that? Perhaps
I'll-
on the energy
I'll just
side.
say, yeah, I'll say a word about war. I mean, I'm not an expert in this, but I agree with you. It's a very serious concern. And actually, Henry Kissinger, before he died, interestingly, spent a lot of time looking at the national security implications of AI at age 97 or something like that, and was very concerned about this issue. But I want to use this opportunity to put another concern about AI on the table, particularly because we're here at the Yale Club and two of us are here from Columbia. And I've been starting to think about the implications of AI for education, which I think is a really big issue. And it is amazing how much better the papers in my classes have become in the past 2 years. Unbelievable. And I think the concerns from most universities at this point are, how do you prevent students from cheating? And that's important. We need to be able to evaluate students. But I think the much bigger question, which I have not seen a lot of really deep thinking on, is what should students be learning in an era in which we have this advanced intelligence coming? And I'm particularly wondering, I've got young grandkids, so my grandkids are going to be adults 20 years from now. What capabilities should we be developing in a 4-year-old today in a world in which we know this technology is going to be advancing, really rapidly? I don't know the answer to that question, but it worries me a lot. One thing that worries me about is I've seen statistics say for the first time ever, the employment rate among recent college graduates is lower than among non-college graduates, which suggests there's something happening in the markets there. I think there's a lot of issues around that.
Uday, a quick additional thought?
Kemker Foundation, we seem to be moths to a flame on existential risk. So we have a paper consultation project on that subject, which I'd love to talk to you about, on looking forward to the future of work, and therefore backing up to what the heck should we be teaching kids. Love to talk to you more about that. On the existential point, I think it's absolutely inevitable that we need a summit bigger than this to engage in this. Problem is to create moral boundaries around the emergence of vast new technologies. Do we have the courage to do that?
All right. That we're starting a conversation on some of the hard parts of this, and I will answer the education one in 2 words: critical thinking. So we like to think we do that already in our universities, but I think it becomes ever more important, particularly as we separate out what AI is giving us that's on the right track versus wrong track, which still seems significant. Okay, we've got a question here in the middle, and then we're going to go to the back next.
Thank you. My name is Trevor, and I have a question about responsibility and accountability. Right now, a lot of the questions from the EJ folks are not about the tech, but about the power imbalance. We're talking about, even in places where there's not a pollutive aspect, their energy bills are going up in low-income communities, and they're not doing anything differently with their energy. So they're paying more while doing the same or even less. And then we have situations like Elon Musk's Grok being powered by diesel generators, literally established overnight in a mostly black community in Memphis. And so people are having a lot of health problems and even dying because of this. And so I don't see how AI is gaining support. I see there's probably a lot of opportunities, as you've all pointed out, but it's not really gaining support from the front lines that are suffering from the consequences. So I'm curious how you all are looking toward how players can hold these folks accountable and responsible in the immediate term.
All right, we have the foremost expert in the world on that question, Michael Glopter.
Well, absolutely, it's a critical concern, and it's definitely it's a major issue. We're actually having a webinar on it on October 2nd, the first of probably several, and the title is False Urgency, False Narratives. Right, thank you, Axel. Because really, both at the community level and at the energy expert level, it's clear that the industry's way overclaiming as a form of distraction. Right, so you can't go head to head with AI and win because the promise is so enormous. You can go head to head with the Public Utilities Commission or the Water Regulatory Agency or all those other folks. And again, as John Toomey said, there's no reason why the richest companies in the world, who already have a great track record of renewable deployment, can't pay their own way. But you're right, it's absolutely a critical issue in terms of subsidizing. That a lot of what the overclaiming is leading to is driving is subsidies that they should not be getting. And by the way, for those of you who don't know about the XAI thing, it's schizophrenic. I live some in Silicon Valley, and what Elon Musk has done is built the largest AI facility in the world in less than 4 months. It's astonishing, right? On the other hand, he did it by placing temporary diesel generators in an already overpolluted community, and he turns them off cyclically to fall underneath the permitting guidelines, so they're only operating for 45 days in a row. It's criminal what he's doing there, right? Now, is the battle to hate AI? No, the battle has to be how the heck did the state of Tennessee allow that to happen? How does the city of Memphis allow that to happen? And so communities mobilizing around that is really critical. But it's, by no means, on the other hand, I think we'd be, as you can see from the tools we've built, we have to use these tools also to help communities engage and to win those battles as well. The origin of this tool before was actually, we built a tool in Connecticut for communities in Bridgeport to be part of the siting council in Connecticut, which is a particularly opaque permitting process. We shifted our focus federally for various reasons, but there's a lot of work to be done in state and local jurisdictions with these kinds of instruments as well. And I just want to, by the way, recognize two of the other. We ran a hackathon at Yale that two former ex-Googler friends of mine helped power, in addition to the students who came to that. And I think there's a question from one of them right now. So thank you.
Michael, I can't help but add on to what you've just said. My own AI dream, which is to get serious, finally, 100 and some years after Pagoo told us this was the answer to spillovers of harm, a structure for measuring those harms, valuing those harms, and charging for those harms. And I believe that would do more for environmental justice than all the executive orders in the world. And I think this is actually something AI could be pretty good at. So when I look forward, that's my big hope, is that we actually get serious about the polluter pays principle. And the same principle in the medical world is do no harm, and we can hold our companies to that standard. All right, we've got a question from the back.
Yeah, quick comment, sir. I'm happy to answer.
Tell us who you are first.
I'm Adam, Optimistic Electron. And then, sir, I'm happy to answer your war question. I'm a prior Navy cryptologist, one-on-one. My question is about what work is being done at the academia level and also like high industry to work on electric conversion affordability and like new research technology type stuff for consumer demand. And then my comment to kind of inform that is consumer demand for electric efficiency, all that kind of stuff is not new. That's 10 years old, it's 5 years old, it's a year old for like the newest kind of technology coming out, especially concerning renewables. But the current average income for the American family is about $50,000 a year if you take out the 0.01% of people. So given that reality, given the cost of living that is right now, there's very little wiggle room to do something as simple as adding insulation, adding a single high efficiency window. So what are we doing when we talk to academia, who it seems to me when I talk to the average everyday working person, that there's very little conversation with these people outside of phone call surveys.
All right, AI for regular people.
Give a quick answer to that. On our advisory board, Jigar Shah is one of our advisors. He's invented the solar PPA and was the head of the DOE loan office. And he's been pushing us, and I'm starting to talk to about creating a project at Yale. And we actually already had started on virtual power plant work, which is a way to virtualize ownership over conservation and demand response in ways that communities can benefit. A lot of these new technologies require a lot of investment. Unfortunately, low-income communities don't have investable assets. When you put solar panels in a low-income community, they don't own that building, so they're not getting the accrued value to property and things like that. So we started under the IRA working on programs like that. Here's a factoid, which is that 20% demand response in any given American city solves the entire grid overcapacity and need for new energy for AI and other forms of electrification. So if we can democratize the payments for that kind of virtual capacity and turn our cities into forms of batteries as well, that's a way to democratize the economic benefits and to spread the wealth of improvements. But we need, and the good news is that most of demand response and conservation is locally and state regulated, so we can do it even in the face of fairly hostile federal environment.
David, you want to add a word?
Your great question points to a reason that we need policy and the limits of AI as well. I mean, if you got the right data, AI tools can provide a lot of analytics and information about what we should be doing in buildings and ways to save energy, improve energy efficiency. But if people don't have the money to invest up front for the capital expenses, or if there's not a policy incentive, it's not going to happen. So AI's got a lot of potential, but it's got limits. And in many situations, we absolutely need policy as well.
Yeah, I think the thing I'll point to is that I know in the creation of the IRA, there were a lot of academics involved in the modeling that led to the policies that ultimately ended up in the IRA. And that modeling took into account, and it was sort of new in many ways, took into account obviously, you know, the energy savings, the carbon emission savings, but also looked across policies and the impact of policies, looked across communities and access to capital. And the IRA ended up being structured in such a way to do more green financing, to put some benefits in for lower served communities or communities that had been dealing with power plant emissions for decades. And so it was great to see that that was happening. You know, unfortunately, there have been some rollbacks of the IRA, yet I still point to the fact that we took modeling in a very multidimensional, multidisciplinary way and use that to help inform the bigger picture overall. There are still many states and localities committed to this in terms of providing upfront capital costs to underserved communities. I'm not saying we've solved this problem at all, but it's great to see that we have people stepping up. We have government stepping up, we have companies stepping up, and we just need to keep pushing and expecting that and requiring more so that we can mitigate the impacts for everybody.
Great, thank you. We have another question right here.
Hi, my name is Christina. I'm an eco reporter. So can we imagine a well-informed, well-trained, well-educated AI keep a check on the, you know, evil or not so well-intended AI?
Good question. We are getting all the tough downside questions on the table here today, which I'm grateful for. Who's got a thought on that?
DJ back there and I were working at Google X on an anti-bias AI, not getting rid of bias in AIs, but an AI to detect bias. Project was eventually shut down, not for political reasons. It's a hard job, but yeah, I mean, I do think, look, there are a lot of inherent dimensions of AI that are inherently unequal, including where the information comes from, including the voices that are represented, including even the relative expertise in using it, right, when there are education gaps. I would trade that off. There are very legitimate concerns, for example, of provenance of information and paying providers for the information that's in there. On the other hand, most low-income communities in the world have never had access to everything the New York Times ever wrote or that the Department of Energy ever wrote. And yes, it is expropriating creators' wealth to have taken it. On the other hand, there's a lot of, if we do it right now, there's a lot of low-income communities getting a lot of new information that they had no access to before. So it's a real trade-off here on these things. And you know, building tools that take into account, we have to get it right for providers. We have to, another form of policy is people who put information in need to get rewarded. But we also have to understand how it's very empowering to have free information. Economists will tell you the value of that also.
Can I ask you a question, Michael? So how do we help ensure that the free information, that greater access to information is factual?
Well, there are, DJ can answer that better than I can. There's all kinds of reference tools. You know, we don't, for example, we don't let people automatically submit the letter that generates yet, right? Because we want them to read it and think about it and say, okay, I'm going to sign it and send it in, right? Eventually, and we're filing, you know, institutional review board guidelines so we can actually understand safely personal identifiable information and its relationship to quality and people's ability to judge the outputs and things like that. So there's a lot of work to be done on that. But these are all, for better or for worse, testable things, and that's why we're not rolling it out fast. we're testing with audiences for some of these questions for sure, but it's an open question. But you can fix these problems, but you need to do it, study it, and work on it, which is why universities have a role to play here.
Well, I'm excited about this part of the story too, because it seems like the Khan Academy model of bringing education to everybody is going to be ramped up 1,000-fold, and suddenly we will have way more people operating at the cutting edge of knowledge creation on 100 different critical elements of a sustainable future. But in the spirit of some of our downside questions, what about the folks that want to make a bomb? How are we going to address that?
This is about energy and climate too.
He's going to take a pass on that hard one. We've got another question here.
Hi, my name is Adore. I'm also from SEPA at Columbia. And I had a question regarding the topic of mining for the minerals used within AI and tech. And I was wondering what you guys' thoughts were surrounding mitigating the current industry and like the communities that have been disrupted at the hands of it and the future communities that could potentially be lost because of it. And if you guys also have insight on other potential ways to like obtain these minerals that may be like transformative that is not what we're currently doing now. Thank you.
So we have an annual at Yale. We also have a conference called Environmental Joy every year, and this is one. And the title this year is on writing the future, and we're asking questions like, how do we, given how much is being taken down, how do we rebuild a sustainable infrastructure systems that are more sustainable and just? Several of the speakers there work on rare earth minerals who are coming, or leaders really. And their answer, because I've asked them this, and they've said, native communities, indigenous communities are not against the use of rare earths. They're against it being extracted in a kind of colonial or exploitative way, right? So every human community in the world knows that change happens. Nobody is static, right? The question is whether change happens without your agency and without your ownership and without your voice, or whether you're engaged and involved with the concerns. And so even my most aggressive activists friends, they're against the exploitation of those resources in the way it's happening now, but they totally believe that if you have communities at the table, you can find ways to do these things that are just and fair and where people are properly remunerated.
David.
So I think I'm going to sound like a broken record because I am, but this is another example of why we need policy. I think the clean energy economy broadly, not just AI, uses lots of minerals that if they're produced in the wrong way has bad environmental impacts. And the demand of that is only going to increase as we transition to a zero carbon economy. We need the policies to protect local communities. Without them, we're going to be in trouble. So, and for that, we need mobilization tools like the one that Michael just showed us.
Let me also say, just having done sustainability work, you have to be really humble when you're doing sustainability work, because the reality is that today's sustainability solution is often the next generation's sustainability nightmare. So you have to be humble and keep asking these questions and keep doing the work. Again, the role of research. There's no perfect system. And you just have to keep recognizing where the problems are. And we've done a lot to eliminate our ability to see that. We used to have something called the Office of Technology Assessment in Congress that if they still existed today would have told you 25 years ago what was wrong with AI and where the risks were. But we've sort of blinded ourselves at a policy level also just through the kind of politics we have. So it's tough. We have to push for foresight and policies that work humbly towards the future.
Another question here.
Yeah, this is Abdul from Columbia SEBA as well.
Please tell us who you are.
Thank you. Abdul from SEBA. I have a comment and a question. First is a comment for Dr. Sandals on education. He said that, actually the number of undergraduate admissions from 23 years has drastically dropped in computer science departments. So AI has gotten to the point when they replace the software engineers themselves.
We're not hearing you up here yet.
Yeah, sorry. I'm stressed, that's why. So I just want to ask about post-deployment incident monitoring. There's the EU AI Act and the US AI Action Plan. How to make sure that there are post-AI standards that can be strong post-deployment? Post-deployment.
AI standards, and how do we make sure they're robust?
First, I love two questions from Columbia SEPA. Thank you for coming out, Columbia SEPA. That's tremendous. So the EU is really leading in many ways in AI regulation, I think. And there's a wonderful book called Digital Empires that I recommend by a Columbia colleague named Anu Bradford, who really she looks at AI regulation in the EU and in the United States and in China. Actually, more broadly than AI, all of digital regulation, and she really classifies the EU as focusing on a regulatory state and helping protect rights of the citizens there. The US is having a free market approach and deregulatory, which is, and that's only been speeded up since she wrote the book with the current administration's policies. And then China focused on AI that serves the state. And I highly recommend the book. It's very interesting. I think your question is how to ensure strong AI standards. That's a question of political will and making sure that actually, one, political will, it's got to come from communities, but two, also educating legislators and policymakers. And I think we have a huge gap on that front. I mean, the lack of understanding of these issues that we're talking about right now in legislatures around the world is vast, because they're complex and they're fast moving. And so I think we need both a combination of mobilizing political will, but also getting people up to speed on what these issues are all about.
Question here on the fourth row.
Just quickly, this is for Michael. This has been so illuminating. I'm Charlie, and my question is just, you've got a big room of people, full house. What could each of us do today, because of your engagement tool, what is the one thing that we could all do today to sign up or start using your tools?
Yeah, well, you can go to pepper.app, PPER.app, and start looking at the Federal Register and seeing things that may be happening there that concern you and use it, and then we'll get more data. The tool itself is actually meant to be deployed by community groups. So if you're involved with a community group, please actually talk to Axel or Vlad. We're looking for beta testers. It's available now, but functionally it's meant to be deployed by people whose job it is to mobilize public engagement, which is not necessarily always a university's job, but we're looking for community. And so it's actually, everything you saw there's basically a widget generator. Those are all tools that can be rebranded by local communities. So we're looking for people to work close hand in hand with around the whole chain of use, the whole user case and personas and all that. So that would be something to help, but we need more data for sure on all that. And I have lots I could say about AI and climate, but you know, that's a different panel on how to take activism on that.
Uday, a further word.
By next week, we will impose upon Yale to distribute a similar engagement point with Grail, the community that I screened. We would enormously appreciate your feedback on the challenges that we've identified where we think AI can make a massive difference to decarbonization in the power sector, in the building materials sector, in materials innovation. And over time, we'll ask you the same question to do with supply chains, value chains, optimization. And hopefully over time, we'll talk about transport, we'll talk about, some of you know the drawdown framework, others of you will remember the old Princeton wedge framework. We're trying to hit the big decarbonization sectors one by one, and we would love to have your feedback on these grand challenges, to say, or these opportunity sets, let's call them, to make a big difference through the use of AI. You could also send anecdotal case studies, whatever you want to send is fine. And separately and distinctly, the Grail digital platform allows you yourselves to start innovating, cooperating with each other, connecting with other academics, connecting with startups, connecting with venture capital firms. Not yet, not immediately. We're just launching it. There may be a beta phase again. We may need some feedback on but the raw material is up and running next week. So we are hoping, we are praying that becomes a very powerful digital space for all of you to collaborate with each other, with us, and with many other people to create research projects, companies, or investments, whatever they may be, or policies that could move the needle in taking the power of AI to the world of decarbonization.
Got a question towards the bar, which we
Hi.
will all be at shortly.
Hi, my name is Sophia from Quantitative Methods and Social Science from Columbia. How imminent is the threat of waste colonism and offshoring? from stemming out from the larger and increasing use of AI. We've got Elon in Memphis. How long before these large, buildings and also the waste that is going to come from them gets to Latin America, for example? Like, it's obviously a governance issue, a policy issue, but what are your thoughts on that?
David,
Yeah,
please.
I think this is I'm glad you raised the question because I think it's an issue that isn't getting enough attention and it needs it. That these big data centers are going to be throwing off a fair amount of e-waste in the years ahead. The GPUs that run there have relatively short lifespan, and there's lots of other waste that's going to be coming out too. On a global scale, it's not necessarily massive, but as this starts getting shipped to places that don't have the right governance structures, there's a real risk for environmental harm from that. China, 10 years ago, maybe a little bit less, stopped taking e-waste from the West, and they said we're not going to do that. But there are many places in Africa, there are places in Latin America that have weak governance structures, and I think that's a real risk that we should be paying attention to. And one tool is what's called extended producer responsibility commitments, and getting data center operators and others to agree that they're not going to send the waste to places that don't have appropriate disposal governance systems, I think is really important.
David, do we have existing prior informed consent rules for that kind of waste? Because that's what's been done in other parts of the waste world, is require those receiving waste to actually be certified as able to manage.
Not as a matter of federal policy, no.
Okay. Uday.
Or in the tech industry.
I want to pick up the point about EPR. So in India, for example, we now have increasingly stringent extended producer responsibility rules on e-waste. And that means that the person who has to comply, let's say it's a big data center company, will want the provider of the e-waste service to have done it at a certain standard. So what that's doing is taking the informal economy on e-waste to a formal economy and institutionalizing it. And we're seeing that as it happens every day in India right now. Now, the other thing that's happened the last 10 years is that it's not really about AI, but anyway, the technologies around e-waste management, and part of that's come from China, to be honest, although there's some very good technologies from the US, have industrialized to a level where it's not someone picking apart stuff. And therefore, when you combine the EPR point with the point about much better industrial processes for processing this, suddenly you start to see a more mature industry. Why does that matter? To the point about mining, urban mining. We've got to mine everything from we need circularity in all of this stuff. And that also comes to the critical minerals debate, which we won't go into right now. The last thing I'll say is AI has an important role to play. So I've seen companies that are using AI to separate waste streams with degrees of separation that you could not imagine earlier, using video cameras and AI analysis of the waste streams.
Well, it does seem like AI, again, another optimization, will be on movement toward a circular economy. We are down to our last 2 minutes. I'm going to give each of our panelists 30 seconds to say something that hasn't yet been said that you'd like to have on the table. David, do you want to start? Or pass?
Nothing's coming to mind that hasn't already been said, other than to thank Yale for convening this. It's been great working together in this. And these issues are so important, and if you want to engage on them, please reach out to us at Columbia. We'd love to engage with you on them.
Michael.
I would say just don't be distracted by the hype. Okay, that is to say, AI is super powerful, super important. I'm very concerned about the ways, for example, in which the fossil fuel industry is riding it as a way to extend their lives, extend the life of use of bad fossil fuels. So whenever you're confronted or thinking about the value of AI and the downsides of AI, try to find, you're not going to beat AI head on, not that we want to even, but there are side effects and there are problems, and find those. Don't treat it like a boogeyman or a Frankenstein, to use an appropriate historical or literary analogy. Look at what's really going on and take that on as we make this evolution. Just don't, so many of our discussions, there are real downsides to AI that have nothing to do with its energy use, like war, or other things, or how it should be used. And we can be distracted. We spend half our time usually talking about the downsides, frankly, that I think the industry wants us to focus on, so they get better permitting or better subsidies. And we need to point to that and then move on to the bigger challenges of how to use this stuff beneficially and not badly.
Alexis.
I think I go a little bit farther with the point about the importance of multidisciplinarity in solving these problems and moving AI forward. That we heard a lot about policy, we heard about technology, we heard about sustainability issues and waste, right? Even human health implications and equity, and that all of us who are working together to think about, playing our part in moving AI forward or having it affect our lives in various ways should be asking the question, who's at the table, who are the decision makers, and do we have everybody represented? And if not, reach out and figure out how to get them to the table.
Uday.
I want to bring this back to existential risk. We had 52 degrees centigrade in northern India last summer. In slum houses, that was 58 degrees centigrade. People were being roasted alive. It's estimated that the number of extreme heat days by the mid-century in northern India will be more than 50%. By 2070, 600 million people might need to move. We know, as a community of people in this room who are experts, we are not winning on climate right now. So if you've got a huge opportunity like this, that could be a 3 to 6 gigaton opportunity per annum, that's the same as, more than India today, and we could apply that in concentrated focus with companies to decarbonize them. That's a huge opportunity, and we need your help. I'll give you an example. One of the networks of utilities we work with had, when we first approached them with it saying, can we help with AI, had 35 utilities, 250 gigawatts, wanting to go to 750 gigs by the end of the decade. They said, please, we need your help, right? They now have 85 utilities. I don't even know what the numbers are. That's a concentrated, high-level intervention that can take them to massive scale. Another example, a partner of ours in this room has 250 companies representing 26% of world GHGs in their scope 3. That's China. 250 nodal points which we could hit, working with people who already want to decarbonize. My only appeal to you is help.
Yeah, and I thought of something that hasn't been said, or at least hasn't been said enough, which is, Uday, what you just showed us there is unbelievable. It's really incredible, and thank you so much for what you did. And Michael, what you just showed us, unbelievable. These are two incredible tools that we just saw. And we did a report a year or so ago on how to use AI to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, and one of our big findings was that not enough people with complementary expertise are talking to each other. People who know about AI aren't talking to the people who know about climate change, and people who know about climate change aren't talking to people about AI. So my hope coming out of this session is if you're interested in this topic, if you want to work on it, find people who have some complementary expertise to yours and work with them.
Well, thank you all, and I'm going to invite you to join me in thanking him in just 1 minute. But I wanted to just add a thought, which comes from Uday's suggestion. And from my perspective, there is risk, there is opportunity, but I think one has to really chase the opportunity in a big way, because the greatest injustice in my mind would be for all of us not to do enough, and climate change overtakes us. And the intergenerational lack of equity in that regard is overwhelming. So I think there's a sort of spirit of consensus around that. And it doesn't mean we can lay back and just assume it's all going to go well, but we did get quite a lot on the table here today, and I'm grateful for that conversation. And David, I'm going to add only to your suggestion that there's opportunities for partnership. Some of it can be helped by AI, and some of it is just good old-fashioned working together. And I'm grateful for that, grateful for the partnership with the Center on Global Energy Policy at Columbia, grateful, Uday, with the partnership with the Kempka Foundation, and it's really a thrill to have us all working together and bringing this conversation to the fore. So thank you, and please join me in thanking you.